Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar titled Social Media Data, Opportunities and Insights for Clinical Research. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's event, ICON, for making it all possible. Joining us today, we're fortunate to have 4 experts participating in this session. I'll first introduce Dr. Elodie Debock, Senior Principal of Patient-Centered Outcomes at ICON. Elodie combines more than 15 years' experience in life sciences and health research with significant expertise in the analysis of clinical outcomes assessments data. Next up, we have Valentine Barbier, a research associate with patient-centered outcomes, also at ICON. His role involves performing analyses of clinical outcomes assessments data from clinical and epidemiological studies. The third speaker with us today is Adele Mbarki, General Manager and co-founder within Health Technology at Capcode. Adele has more than 9 years of experience in projects related to big data and artificial intelligence, and his work has made him a recognized expert in the world of digital health. The final speaker is Joelle Malab, International Project Manager of Health Technology at Capcode. Her concentration revolves around management, health policies, and social and behavioral sciences. Together, they will be providing insights on how to collect, use, analyze, and interpret social media data in different contexts. And now I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Elodie. Hi, please take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Sydney. We are so glad to present this exciting topic today. For this, we will start with a bit of theory about social media listening and natural language processing. We will then have the pleasure to present you a real-world setting study, which is a Merck case study, and it is a good illustration of the fruitful collaboration between ICON and Capcode teams. This study is also with very rich data, using 2,000 testimonies, and with good results that Joelle will present very soon. Globally, this study is an evidence that testimonies provide real-world data that can be used to improve the care process and patient quality of life. Globally, today, we are aiming to use this webinar in order to demonstrate the strength of collecting the voices of patients and caregivers for the full product life cycle. We will then take time for a Q&A session, and we are very excited to have the opportunity to discuss with you all and to have exchanges about your perspective and have the opportunity to answer your questions. It is very important for us to thank all people who have made this study a success. Many thanks to Paul, Pierre, Simon, Stéphane, Alexia, and Mutuza. Thank you so much to you all. Our world is disrupted by data, a lot of very rich data. And this very rich data have a high potential. And within this data, there's this social media data that we will speak today about. These data represent patients and service users' views and experiences that are collected online. Globally, social network data help to understand patient perspective, and this is a powerful tool. We made a list here on this slide about the different aspects that can be understood using social network data. But this list is not exhaustive. It's just kind of examples. For instance, you can use this data in order to understand the fears and hopes associated with the treatment of patients. You can understand their perspectives. You can understand their difficulties, their needs. And you can understand a lot of other different aspects that are so important and so meaningful for the patient. In fact, these data can influence treatment decisions and can influence change management. Knowing that, we note that these data cannot be ignored. We need to analyze this data. We need to work on this data because they are rich and they are very important to be taken into account in order to understand the patient perspective. What we would like to represent here is the fact that you really can gather patient insight throughout the full product life cycle. And globally, this can really help to inform your strategy, because if you use data to know this data in order to know the daily difficulties and the needs in disease management from the patient perspective, if you use this data in order to understand the hopes, the fears, the challenges, and the unmet needs of existing treatments from the patient perspective again, you can have here meaningful data. And you know how it is important to understand what is meaningful from the patient perspective. You know how it's difficult to really assess what is the level of meaningfulness of the data. Using this data can really inform your strategy of product development, and using the data can really also help to inform different aspects of your strategy, a lot of several aspects. For instance, this can be useful in order to define what clinical outcome assessments data you need to collect, you need to include within your clinical trials in order to be able to really understand the meaningful aspects from the patient perspective, and so to strengthen your dossier. After the approval and during the life cycle, this is still possible to use this data in order to really try to assess the treatment, the perspective from the patient of your treatment. And this kind of data can really be useful in order to help you with several aspects, like increasing the adherence to your treatments. It is so difficult sometimes to understand what are the challenges from the patient perspectives. What challenges the patient is facing actually with your treatment, on what aspects you need to work in order to increase the adherence. It could be the same about improving the care process. What aspects are needed to work on in order to improve that? And this data can also be used for a lot of different other aspects within your strategy. And we have no time to cite everything today. However, I'm sure that you have a lot in mind, as we have. It is now my pleasure to introduce Adel, who will continue the presentation with the next slides.
Thank you very much, Elodie, for the introduction. Again, we are really excited to discuss about the topic. I will try to summarize the company, what we are doing, and how we are doing that. So, first of all, we are historically coming from the clinical research world. Basically, we are a spin-off of a contract research organization dedicated to extract and generate real-world data from epidemiological studies and PRO studies. So basically, we are coming from the healthcare ecosystem, we are coming from the evaluation and the pharma ecosystem, and historically, we were an R&D team of Kappa Santé. And nowadays, we have Capcode with more than 20 people dedicated to extract, analyze, and provide medical insights from social networks. The medical aspects and scientific aspect of the activity is really important nowadays. When we are talking about social media, mainly there are use cases based on brand monitoring, communication aspects, and so on. And there is a lot of actors, generalist ones in general for that. Our specificity is to be really dedicated to the health sector and to coming from the health sector. And basically our work is to use artificial intelligence approaches and mainly NLP, natural language processes approaches, to extract from the messages spontaneously shared on social networks the medical insights. Can be interesting regarding the all the challenges we are facing in real world data ecosystem. So regarding our activity, regarding the fact that we provide insights and data for evaluation aspects, dossier reimbursement, and so on, we need, and it's important for us to have a strong evaluation processes. That's why we are nowadays with more than 60 scientific works published, because we need, and it's important for us to work in terms of explicability. So basically, we publish the algorithm, the methodologies we are using. And in other hand, we need also to have scientific valorization for the studies we are leading. The fact is, regarding the social media data, one of the main challenge we are facing is the fact that patients are not talking with medical ontologies, with medical vocabulary. So if I had to summarize the work we are doing in daily basis at Capcode, we are trying to structure data and extract medical insights from unstructured sources, basically social networks. And for that, we need to transform and translate patient vocabulary, patient languages into medical ontologies, which is really important. And for that, you need to be at the crossroad between medical science and technology. You need to have data scientists to have the best models and so on, but you only also have to have the medical expertise to validate and to have strong confidence on the accuracy of the insights we deliver. Um, Nowadays, we have more than 15 models in production. So mainly, we extract insights from the patient point of view regarding the care pathway. So we reconstruct the care pathway regarding the experiences exchanged and shared by patients themselves. We identify quality of life data, and for that, we are trying to be as um, close as possible of the state of art. So basically, we are using methodologies like EQ 5D scales. So that's important because of the acceptability of this kind of data and this kind of approaches. We also identify unmet needs. We do that for patients, but also for caregivers, HCPs. We also have capabilities in focusing in specific point on treatments, basically therapeutic switch, misuse, signal detection, and pharmacovigilance in general. But we also work on topics like societal challenges like fake news and so on. The point is, for each use of these data, you need to have the best model. You need to validate the best model. We need to evaluate the best model, and that's our work in daily basis. If we focus on the part of how does it work, so basically we monitor more than 1.5 million sources in internet. So sources can be social networks like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and so on, but also forums or blogs, regarding the fact that there is a lot of website where there is comment sections where people and patients in particular can exchange and share their own experiences. The point is, at this stage, you extract messages mentioning specific pathology, specific treatment, or specific public health decision, but you're not sure of who is talking. Is it a patient talking? Is it a professional talking, healthcare professional talking, or caregiver, and so on? So the pre-processing part of the methodology is really important. You need to have the best data quality data set at the end. So we have a lot of filtering methodologies to be sure of the population we are analyzing, the experiences we are analyzing, especially regarding some criterias of the pathologies they suffer of, their medical conception, and so on. when we have this clean data set, mainly we're using modeling, and I will go back on that specifically, but we use a mix between uh, language approach basically, but we also need a mathematical approach. I will go further on that. And at the end, we use the model I previously presented to extract and provide the insights regarding the scientific question we are trying to resolve. So nowadays, with only one data source, one tool, we are trying to develop several use cases. So mainly, we have the first kind of approach we are developing, which is the observational studies. From a scientific point of view, that's a research topic called infodemiology, which is basically using web data for epidemiological purposes. So epidemiology studies are what we will talk about today, but it can be interesting to show you how with only one tool, one methodologies, and one data source, what you can do also. So basically, we engage patients, we enroll patients, we recruit patients on studies, so that can be epidemiological studies after or clinical trials or focus groups. So basically, we have a lot of criteria, and we try to identify patients regarding their medical conditions. In the other hand, we are doing prospective analytics to try to help healthcare authorities and pharma companies to be more reactive regarding the threat that can be seen through social networks. So basically, we do early signal detection for pharmacovigilance purposes, for fake news purposes, and so on. So, which is interesting in this kind of approach is at the end of the day, you will have access to an important population that's methodologies and scientific topic validated already. And at the end, it can be seen as an interesting approach complementary to other data sources and so on. If I may, before passing the floor to Sydney, if I may give you more details on how does it work. So if we take a specific example to be concrete, so we extract a lot of messages that can be hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands, and so on. So we have messages posted by patients, at least with by internet user at this stage. And the first step is purely linguistic. Is there any medical center mentioned? Is there any adverse event, treatment, HCP specialty mentioned, and so on? And this first step of languages analytics will enhance a mathematical approach based on machine learning or deep learning. So basically, our work is to train models to be being able to extract the data we are trying to deliver regarding the scientific question we are handling.
And now I'm happy to bring on Valentine to join me. Hi. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Sydney. Um, thank you. Hi. Sorry, I have a bit of connection issues. So hello. I will present now the application of the different methods and algorithm Adele spoke about earlier, but in a real-world setting. And so I will take the example of a study we made with Merck about locally advanced or metastatic bladder cancer online in the United States. So the main objective of the study was to improve Merck's knowledge about patients with locally advanced or metastatic bladder cancer, but also their knowledge on their caregivers. And it is based on the United States population. And so data was collected for three different phases, so three different objectives. So the first one was to identify the main topics of discussion of patients or caregivers. The second one was to see the challenges and the unmet needs they have to face. And the last one was to see the treatment experience perception they have. So we collected a lot of testimonies and their evolution over time, but also other socio-demographic information such as age or gender when it was available. But we also took some other information that allow us to distinguish patients and from caregivers. And so finally, we took some testimonies of part of testimonies to use it as examples for the different findings. Then I will present a bit more the methodology of data extraction and the selection of the corpus we had at the end. So we selected a lot of different sources from the web, and thanks to different keywords linked to the study, we had nearly 150,000 testimonies coming from nearly 70,000 users. Then we had to make a selection of the and apply some filters to get to have a better focus on the population we wanted to get. And so first we removed the non-medical sources. Then we identified the patients and caregivers' experiences. And finally, we made a focus on more advanced stages of bladder cancer. So finally, we ended up with a caregiver and a patient corpus that I will present a bit more in the next slide. And with those corpus, we were able to do some more qualitative or quantitative analysis to respond to the different phases and objectives we had. So now more about the data. So we collected the data from the 1st of January 2015 to the 4th of March 2021. And we had 1,902 testimonies coming from 941 patients or caregivers, among which we had 28% of patients and 72% of caregivers. And all of those testimonies were coming from 88 different sources. So now I will let Joël present you the different results we had during this study.
Thank you, Valentin, for your presentation. I will continue with presenting the results of the main objectives of our study. I will start with the objective number 1, which was to identify the main topics of discussion of patients and of caregivers. Starting with patient messages, we have noticed that patients really mainly discussed around the diagnosis, the different treatment possibilities. They exchanged messages of hope and support, and they shared their experiences with other patients as well. They also discussed steps of their healthcare pathway, the management of their disease, the methods used for screening and diagnosis, and they also shared messages about their interactions and their relationship with their healthcare team. It is interesting to note that we were able to identify these topics using the bi-term topic modeling. Without going into much detail into this methodology, this is an unsupervised machine learning method that helped us identify these main topics. We also followed this with a manual interpretation of the topics to make sure that the categorization was correct. Moving into the caregiver testimonies, we noticed that caregivers mainly share experience. They go into social media to really benefit from the sense of community. They shared their experiences with other maybe caregivers. They shared messages of hope and support. They also talked about complications around bladder cancer. So here they were mainly talking about patients. They also shared messages on diagnosis methods and medical acts. Just to note here that there is a category of others here and also in the messages of patients. For the category of others, these were smaller topics that were too specific to be categorized as a topic on their own. So they were grouped into this category of others. They mainly talked, some topics were about the relationship with the grandchildren, for example. The other topics talked about the COVID-19 pandemic and the repercussions. These were grouped into this category. Moving into the second objective of our study, the challenges and unmet needs. We will start by focusing on patient messages, and we identified unmet needs and challenges. We found it interesting to group these difficulties into categories of the healthcare pathway. So we categorized some difficulties in the before the pathology, in the diagnosis and screening step. Some categories were grouped in the pathology through the bladder cancer period, and other difficulties were grouped in the after phase, in the remission phase. Other difficulties were grouped throughout the healthcare journey. So they were really transversal, such as the psychological impact, the need for sharing, and the financial impact of the care. When we look at these difficulties, when we look at the top 10 difficulties that were mentioned in patients' testimonies, we realize that the top 3 revolve around mainly the fear and management of treatment-related adverse events. It also revolved around the psychological impact of the disease, the feelings of loneliness and depression, anxiety, fear, and distress. Patients also expressed in their messages difficulties related to the progression and worsening or complication of the disease. Other difficulties revolved around prognosis errors, needs for sharing, and a need for information about a treatment. We move then into messages posted by caregivers. We also categorized the difficulties mentioned by caregivers throughout the healthcare pathway. We categorized them in the before, in the through the pathology step, and in the after. There were also the difficulties that were mentioned throughout the medical journey, the healthcare journey, the psychological impact, the need for sharing, and the financial impact. We realized for the caregivers that the difficulties that were expressed in the transversal or throughout all the steps of the journey made out the bulk of these difficulties with more than 50%. The caregivers also mentioned difficulties related to the treatment. This was the top 2 unmet need or difficulty expressed by caregivers, the treatment and medical intervention. So the fear of and management of treatment-related adverse events. There were also the top 3rd difficulty, most talked about difficulty, was related to the pathology. So the consideration and management of symptoms of bladder cancer, for example. When we look at the top 10 difficulties, it is interesting to note here that these difficulties in a caregiver message could be about the caregiver himself or about their loved one, so the patient. We notice in the top 3, the top 1 is the psychological impact. The psychological impact here relates more to the caregiver than the patient. We realize with the blue, in the psychological impact category, that this relates to the caregiver more. The need for sharing here relates to both caregivers and patients. As for the 3rd main unmet need, that was mentioned in caregiver testimonies, it related more to the patient, which is very logical, because the difficulty is related to the treatment. So treatment-related adverse events and special situations, and the fear of these adverse events and the management of these adverse events. We also found it interesting to distinguish between the difficulties that were really centered on the caregiver and the difficulties that were centered on the patient, and both of these were mentioned in caregiver messages. When we look at the top three challenges related to caregivers, we realize that it's mainly about the psychological impact, the loneliness, the depression, the anxiety, the fear that the caregiver might feel during all of the patient's healthcare journey, the burden of end-of-life support, the grief that they might feel at the end of life, and the impact of being a caregiver. It is really an energy-consuming role. It is not easy, and they really expressed this impact in their messages. While looking at the challenges that were mentioned by caregivers about the patients, it talked about the fear and management of the adverse events, delays in screening, difficulties related to diagnostic delays, and difficulties related to therapeutic dead ends or ineffective treatments. While we continue the objectives of the study, we reach the treatment experience perception. The two treatments that we discussed in this, that we analyzed in the study, were immunotherapy and chemotherapy. We also made sure that in the messages where we found discussions around treatments, which were around 300 messages, we used lexical fields, we used secondary filters in order to identify messages talking about testimonies. We also made sure that in these messages, we made sure that the treatment was taken. In 80% of these messages, the treatment was indeed taken. When looking at the overall perception of treatment, we noticed that it's more negative than positive in both patients and caregivers, but we will look in more details in the following slides for each of these treatments. When focusing on chemotherapy, the bulk of the messages related to chemotherapy, we realize that it is more of a negative perception, more than positive. But what's interesting is that patients talk about their treatments as a fact, as part of their healthcare journey, as part of their healthcare pathway, while caregivers, on the other hand, are more critical of the treatment. They really express their opinion more, which is likely here more negative than positive. We realize, while looking at these graphs, we realize that caregivers show a negative opinion about chemotherapy. So chemotherapy was perceived more negatively than positively, both in patients and caregiver testimonies, while caregivers showed more negative opinion about it. The main drawbacks that were expressed in messages related to adverse events and pain and lack of effectiveness, while the main benefits related also to effectiveness and the extension of lifespan. It is really worthy to note here that the effectiveness was mentioned as both benefits and drawbacks because it related to individual cases. If in one case the chemotherapy worked, it was expressed as a benefit. If it didn't work, it was expressed as a drawback. So this really relates to individual cases. We move into the immunotherapy focus. We notice here that less people talked about immunotherapy. There's a smaller data set, a smaller number of messages discussing immunotherapy. Nonetheless, the perception towards immunotherapy was more positive in almost, it was perceived positively in almost half of the testimonies. But like in chemotherapy, caregivers tend to give a more negative opinion, a negative perception more than the patients do. This was also seen in chemotherapy. But the main perceived benefits of immunotherapy was also the effectiveness and few adverse events, since it is a targeted therapy, while the main perceived drawbacks of immunotherapy was the lack of effectiveness and the adverse events. So the conclusion that we may draw from the study is the importance of the psychological aspect. Really, thanks to this study, we were able to dive deep into the psychological impact of the disease on patients. But it also offered us a new outlook. It also offered us the outlook of the caregiver. The caregiver role sometimes is overlooked. Sometimes it is not discussed as much as the patient's point of view. So really, thanks to this study, we were able to dive deep, to have the point of view, to look at the disease from the lens of the caregivers as well. We were able to identify the psychological impact of the disease on caregivers as much as on patients. This study really allowed us also to realized the importance of giving information about adverse events and their management, since it was one of the top main challenges or unmet need that were expressed by patients. And finally, the importance of support services for patients and caregivers, since we noticed that one of the top topic of discussion or the main objective of social media in all of this is the need for support, the need to give hope, the need to feel that they were not alone in the disease or in their circumstances. So the importance of support services for patients and caregivers was really important and was shown very clearly in this study.
And with that, I'm going to invite Elodie back. Hi there. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for presenting that. We will now take time to highlight the different points, the key points we would like that you remind about this webinar today. What we really want to say is that social network data are real-world data. They provide very rich panel information, as you had the opportunity to see within the results presented by Joelle. This information are really perspectives from patient, caregiver about disease and treatment. So these perspectives, as you know, could be really meaningful to be taken into account for your strategy. Globally, this informs the unmet needs in disease management and in existing treatments. So this could also clarify points if you have assumptions that you would like to validate. It's a kind of source of data you can use in order to do so. Globally, gather patient insight for the full project lifecycle using social network data can be a powerful strategy. Today, we presented one example, but we can have a lot of other kind of examples that are evidences of that, taking into account these sorts of data with all the sources of data you can have could be really powerful altogether. As we said earlier, this can be used to improve the care process. This can be used to improve the quality of life of patients. This can be used to enhance adherence to treatment. This can be used to tweak the perception of a specific treatment, and this can be used in all of the aspects. Globally, we hope that we will have the opportunity to discuss further these aspects with you during the Q&A session. We saw that a few questions came, so we will be very happy to discuss this further with you in a few seconds. This slide is really to let you know the upcoming events if you would like to register. So in one webinar will occur on 7th December. This webinar will be about best practices for laboratory solutions related to cell and gene therapy clinical trials. And webinar will be placed also on the 14th of December. And this webinar will be about home health best practice and processes to build confidence in the value of in-home services. If you would like to register, you have the links that are available within the handouts table. So you can click on the handouts table on your right, and you can register directly using the links that are available. We really would like to take the opportunity, myself, but also all the co-speakers of today, to thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. Again, this is really a topic that is so exciting on our perspective that we really wanted to discuss today with you all. And we are looking forward to finalizing this webinar with exchanges with you all.
Thank you, Elodie. Okay, let's get started with our Q&A session. I just want to remind the audience that you can submit your questions in that Q&A tab, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the next several minutes. So the first one for you all, social network data often include a lot of abbreviations, misspelled words, and several jargons or types of language. How does the algorithm deal with that?
Yeah, I think that I'm the guy answering the question. Basically, that's really important, and we have technical methodologies. We are using stemming, for example. So we try to avoid these kind of difficulties. But at the end, the point is really to that patients in social medias in general are using specific vocabulary. That's why the linguistic aspect of the methodology is really crucial, because um, regarding the fact that you have technical approaches to decrease the difficulties of abbreviations, misspelled words, and so on, you also have to translate the vocabulary patient to medical ontologies. So the algorithms are handling that, and we have an iterative process to improve quality and the linguistic aspects of the models in real life each quarter.
Great response, thanks. Okay, let's move to this next question. It's a good one here. Karen asks, how do you navigate GDPR when collecting data from public sites, thinking specifically of data extraction and storage and ethics when dealing with scientific publication?
Again, I'm your guy. Basically, from the GDPR perspective, we are extracting and collecting only data from public websites. So basically, we only extract open data on social media. So you do not have access to the private messages you exchange with your own community and your own family, for example. It's important because from a citizen point of view, it's important to have this privacy and the limit of the approaches we can handle. So the fact is, these data are available and exploitable. So basically, each user on the forums, platforms, and so on is signing general use conditions, and that include the fact that the data can be reused. So we do not have to extract individual consents and so on regarding the studies we are handling. But what's important also is to have a privacy by design approach. So basically, before storage of the data we're extracting, we have a model identifying personal data to erase them before storage. And after that, we transform the patient nickname or so on into numbers. And at the end, we only do populational studies and not individual studies.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted just to highlight this part that is very important, the anonymization of data.
Yeah.
even if, as I said at the beginning, we focused on public data, it's even if we need to think about focusing on this privacy data, anonymization of data part before going ahead with analysis. That's very important to take time on that.
Okay, very detailed response. Thank you both. Okay, we have another question here. In the pre-processing step, do you have procedures to reduce or eliminate bots and fake accounts?
Yeah, it's really important because we know that fake accounts and fake content is more and more reality on social media. And yeah, we actually we evaluate the digital activity of the account we are including in our studies. So basically, when you talk about bots or fake accounts, and there is specific digital activities, and regarding the fact that you have the standard goal of human activity, you can easily identify fake accounts and bots to erase them from the study and exclude them from the study. So yeah, we have processes dedicated to that, and we are, and it's important part of the activity regarding the fact that again the insight must be the more accurate regarding the usage we have of the data in pharma companies.
Okay, yeah, that was a great question. Perfect. Okay, the next one asks, are your algorithms developed to treat only English sources? Would that be applicable to other languages?
No, because actually the linguistic aspects of the models are made in French and English historically, but each new country we add and we adapt the linguistic aspects of the model. So basically, we already perform studies in Spain, Italy, in Latin America, in Portugal, and so on. So the fact is, the linguistic aspects have to be improved for each new language, but that's not the most painful part of the modelization.
Just wanted to add one thing about that. It's important to keep in mind that it's not a translation.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very important because the patient, depending on the country in which the patient is, will not have the same way to discuss things.
Yeah.
And we know that it's very important to take into account the culture point of view and the fact that it's linked to the country and to the culture of the patient. So just to say that it's not a good process to keep all the languages, translate in English, and then use algorithms on English text. It's very important to adapt the algorithms to the language in order to ensure that the different aspects linked to the culture of the patient, which is very important because which is impactful, is taken into account in the process. So just wanted to say that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, the next question we have is a little bit long, so let me know if I have to repeat any part of it. Can you please talk more about the manual qualitative analysis process? You identify a subset to review manually. If so, do you use AI to identify the most useful posts to review? What percentage of posts are being reviewed manually? I think maybe I'll stop there so that's not too many questions at once.
For example, we use the manual interpretation for the unmet needs. We use the qualitative, the analysis method of saturation. So we took several data sets and we analyzed them manually. We annotated the messages to identify difficulties or unmet needs within these messages. And the method of saturation entails that whenever we don't find any new difficulties or a really minimal number of difficulties within a new subset or within a new sample, we can say that, or we can consider that we really have had an exhaustive approach of or an exhaustive identification of the difficulties in that data set.
Okay. Let me see if we can pull a little more from this. And hopefully you didn't already address this. Are you doing manual coding and using that to evaluate saturation? And how do you ensure that the posts are from patients? And then I think we already addressed the other languages. How do you handle different languages?
Yes, Adel. No, go.
For the manual coding, we are using manual coding at different steps. So basically, when we train the model to identify, for example, quality of life impact, so we need the manual analytics part because there is human expertise to train the algorithms themselves. So we use processes like the double-blind processes and so on, which is classical in the healthcare industry. We are using also this to evaluate the models to know the sensitivity, specificity, VPP, and so on, performances of the model. And in the studies for saturation aspects, we also use manual qualitative approaches to be confident and to have the most exhaustive point of view regarding the specificity you are exploring. For the other question regarding the patient and how we qualify patients, so basically what we do is using the vocabulary used by the patient. So basically when you are a patient, you have specific vocabulary, and with NLP, you can modelize patient vocabulary when you have enough data. So we train the specific model to classify and qualify the poster. So basically we can identify patients, HCPs, or caregivers mainly. And it's based on linguistic approach, and we train mathematical machine learning algorithms to identify patients and so on.
Okay, very detailed response. Thanks. Hopefully that answered your question. Let's going back to the GDPR question. Karen wants to know if the data is truly anonymized. So they are thinking that if quotes are kept in things like tweets, theoretically, could somebody not search Google and find that person's personal account and then their personal data out of that?
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's real. Yeah, if we are using quotes at our stage, so basically we try to anonymize from a maximum point of view. So we try not to give all the messages, just a
Yeah.
part, the interesting one, and so on. But yeah, basically that's the risk of identification. Sorry, regarding this part, but that's really difficult to handle this point because there is no technical solution regarding that. And if you see, no Google have access to Twitter data. So when you searching on Google, you have all the results. So yeah, you can go back to the patient, to the account at least, if you search that on Google. And there is at this stage no issue we had with this fact. But yeah, that's one of the risk of re-identification we have with this approach.
Okay.
Just wanted to add that all the quotes are truncated, so it's not only anonymized; it's also truncated. So when you anonymize, you do your best to, as you say, just keep the key the key messages, but not all the sentence and things like that. Globally, it's really challenging to find the person. It's always possible if you take a lot of hours and things, but honestly, it's not straightforward. So globally, the job is done, I would like to say, because it's anonymized, it's really restricted. So as you said, there was no issues in the past, and we are not expecting to have issues with that. However, we are really careful with that. I mean, anonymized, and really keep what is really important to keep, but not everything. Knowing that, We tried, honestly, for this study, with Valentin, we tried to find people just to see if it worked, and it's really, really challenging to do.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for adding that on. Okay, we have reached the end of the hour, so we're going to make that our last question. I wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for participating today and giving fantastic presentations.
Thank you to the audience and the
Thank
very
you.
good
Thank
questions.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In closing, we hope you enjoyed this webinar sponsored by ICON, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.